Heather's been playing Forspoken for us. Can you give us like a one-sentence summary of your time with the game?
A mixed bag that shows some potential, but I'm still a little on the fence about in some respects.
What's the story for anybody who isn't aware of kind of the game and the fantasy element of it?
So you play like as a young woman from New York who's called Frey, and she gets thrown into this fantasy world of Athia. I think it's all about a story of her finding herself in this fantasy world, trying to like have inner growth, but also find her way home. Yeah. That's the impression I have of it anyway.
So how does the magic work for the combat?
So you have kind of a one elemental set of spells to begin with, and basically you have heavy attacks and lighter attacks. You can kind of send out a quick burst of spells,
right,
or a heavier like blast, and then use different dedicated powers. Some of them are more defensive. I would definitely say the magic is the main highlight so far of my experience, because it felt very punchy and like it almost felt like you were firing a gun, if that makes sense, because you're like blasting out spells from your hands, and it feels satisfying when you land blows on enemies and you can see the sort of damage splay up as you hit them, and you obviously earn experience. And they told me that I think there's sort of 100 spells or something that you will eventually unlock, because it's all about you tailoring it to how you want to use magic and fight.
Okay,
so that's quite interesting.
So it's not just a case of, okay, you've got a more powerful fireball spell. It's like, no, do you like that? Or you can pick different spells that you learn. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, different skill trees.
Initially, in some of the opening cinematics and when you enter into the world, it looks quite interesting and quite colourful, and they've played with a lot of stuff. And it is a fantasy world. There's a big dragon, like they're going full fantasy, and the trailers initially looked really spectacular and really drew you into this world. However, the further you get into it, it gets more and more drab and grey.
Yeah, I think the whole premise is that like the breaks affected the world so much, but you get to the first open world area known as the Barren Plains, and it just feels so empty and devoid of life, and it just doesn't feel like a place I especially want to explore. And I get the kind of vibe they're going for through the actual premise of the world itself, but it's just so one note and grey.
And you can do like a barren, dead place that things don't live, like in Elden Ring.
Yeah.
But it still can be alive and interesting, and there can be different colour and stuff, and they can have variety.
Yeah.
Whereas, my God, I'm again, it's this thing that you said at the start where there's so much premise there. I am hoping that as you do more in the world, like it becomes more colourful, like it opens up, because the whole point is that the world is dead and life has been sucked out of it and stuff, and everyone's impoverished, and so I understand it, but I really hope that comes in, because at the moment, oh my God, like you said, it's just boring.
It does. My worry is that it will feel a bit lifeless, but I know that I think there are 4 realms in the Athia in the world, and I've only seen a small bit of it. So I have a hope that maybe there'll be more sort of visually interesting areas, but I also get what they're going for. But I'm just on the fence about it a little bit.
It's a real risk. The other thing that you mentioned as well was the difficulty level of this game, and that there is definitely, and I think this is the thing, the trailers and everything that they've started, and the look of it as well, and the graphical side, it looks like they're going down. They're kind of trying to capture like a Final Fantasy crowd to a certain extent, but for Western audiences and maybe younger gamers or more casual gamers. But you said it's actually quite tricky.
Yeah, I think we were thrown into a few of the chapters, and the first big fight we have is against the dragon, the famous dragon that we've seen in the trailers. And it's obviously all about showing you the ropes of how you can dodge with magic parkour and how you can throw spells at the dragon. But it's very fast-paced, very easy to get hit, and it just takes a little bit of time to get used to. And I thought, okay, this isn't so bad. But then we sort of jumped to chapter 5. So you have to go through this castle against all these enemies, and then there's this big fight, and it was 3 stages to this fight. And then you only had a very small amount of like healing potions, which I was very reliant on. And it was just very tricky. It was very, this was on like normal mode. And yeah, it took me a fair few goes at it. It was just a noticeable sort of difficulty spike from the earlier chapters I had played from there. But again, there is an easy mode or easy setting that you can go on, which I wasn't able to change it to, but it was just a very noticeable
And having you don't mind tricky games, having a hard game, that's fine. That's not, and again, this is like, we're not saying that like, oh, games have to be hard. I think what would worry me about this game is people would get it thinking it's a nice like graphical version of Breath of the Wild, like a lovely like fun game. You can just have fun in this amazing world and have magic and fly around and stuff. And in reality, it's like, no, this is really hard. And I think people will bounce off it and just be a bit disappointed. There were other games journalists there doing it for a preview as well, and you said that they had exactly the same issue where they were like, wow, this is tricky.
It was just a very sort of tricky fight, and I can see sort of elements of Final Fantasy 15 in some of their combat design and some of the things that they've done. And there are like big fights in Final Fantasy 15, but I never quite felt like I struggled too much in that game.
Especially early on.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it feels, I mean, I don't know how many chapters are in it, but it felt like it was an early-ish stage in the game. So I'm intrigued to see how people get on with that, and also if, you know, maybe spending more time with it ahead of that fight, if it would be easier, but I'm not sure. So
the other thing, after watching some of the footage that you captured, and I'll play a little bit of a clip now to give an example, but my, Cuff is annoying.
You, the one talking to me right now, or this... Cuff?
Cuff? It's a bit reductive, isn't it? Cuff? Pfft, Gauntlet, maybe. Vamp Race. Oh, Vamp Race. Vamp Race.
He's a very chatty, sentient bracelet. He basically just has, because he acts as your guide in the world, so he's going to be your compass. He scans the landscape, so he'll direct you. He'll also talk in combat, and he has like a practical use in combat where, like, if you have an enemy behind you, he'll be like, hey, watch out. So you're like, oh yeah, he's helping you. But he also says some of the same lines again and again. He will keep chatting to you as you're sort of walking around the world, and even when I stood idly, he was sort of like, hello,
what you doing?
What are you doing? So I mean, and he says like he's attached to you, so there's no getting away from him.
I think it wouldn't be so annoying if we hadn't been recently playing God of War, where Mimir, who is attached to you as well throughout the whole thing, is done so well and is such a perfect example of how you do that companion that you can't get rid of that helps you in the world. So I think I am comparing something unfairly, but it is like, I don't know if it's the scripting or the voice. The guy's got like a haughty-taughty British accent, and it's very like condescending, and it's just, and then also the scripting's just a bit off. I don't know. It just feels that's going to get really annoying, I feel.
I worry that just because some of the lines are the same in the combat, it might get a bit irksome, to put it kindly. I think if they just cut down the banter just a little bit, it would be less noticeable, I think.
So I know in a lot of games like Assassin's Creed and others, they try and implement parkour, and it just doesn't really work as well, because a huge part of parkour is the fluidity of the movement, which is very hard to do. The great thing about this is they're like, well, magic. So you can zip up a wall and you can fly over something and do a flip, and it completely works within the narrative element of the game and the feel of the game because you're doing it with magic. How is it to actually play with?
It works in the same way as magic, as in you can upgrade it. So eventually you'll get bigger leaps and be able to do more fun stuff. So I was very at the sort of very basic level of magic parkour. But essentially it works as it's supposed to. It's not as satisfying as the actual magic itself in combat, but it's definitely like it helps you just spring up over walls and like get away from enemies quickly if you want to.
It's like a quick dodge. It does more than just shuffle your feet. You actually do a backflip, or you completely go to the other side of the arena.
Yeah, because again, like the open world is full of ruins and things like that, so you're basically able to sort of use the ruins as springboards and just sort of jump over them. And yeah, again, it does work. It takes a little bit of getting used to when you first get it, because it's a bit finicky, but it's definitely like an interesting idea and an interesting way to traverse this open world they've created. I'd be interested to see with like upgrades and the sense of progression it has, how fun it would be later on as well. It
would be really good if it turned into the equivalent of like Spider-Man's, like in the Spider-Man games, the traversal in that, and you're just able to ping off like around the world, and then it's just fun to explore. Well, it's really interesting, because like you say, there's a bones of something there really, really good. But I'm worried that everything else will take it down so much. That it's just not going to be a great game.
It's, again, like I said, I'm on the fence because it's so hard to tell at this early stage when you've jumped into different chapters sporadically. Like, how it's going to be as a complete picture. But there are certain things that I think they've done well, and there's a really interesting concept behind a fish out of water person in a fantasy world. They could have so much fun with that, and I'm intrigued to see what they do. But at the moment, I'm still unsure. Like, the world isn't necessarily a place I want to get lost in yet, but it's early days, so
fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. I have hopes. I mean, they're doing lots of fun things. They've, yeah, again, it's such a, I'm so on the fence about it, but I think the magic, if that's something that really interests you, it's quite a fun, the magic's probably the biggest sell for me at the moment.
Yeah, the magic
out of
and the
everything.
combat. Yeah, looks really good.
For sure.
Great. Well, fingers crossed that Forspoken will be able to make the most of the good parts of the game, and for the full review and any other previews that we've got, make sure you subscribe to GamesRadar.
I just move shit with my freaking mind! Yeah, okay, that is something I do now. I do magic, talk to sentient cuffs, kill jacked up beasts. You know what? I'll probably fly next.
Now you're just being ridiculous.
Oh, that's too far. Good to know there's a line.
If you could just master these new abilities, with my help, of course.
Did you not just see me take out that gnarly beast?